Vamos a dar comienzo a continuación al panel central de esta jornada, de un trabajo sin futuro a un futuro de trabajo decente. Para esto vamos a invitar a subir al escenario a quienes serán los integrantes de este panel. El señor Guy Ryder, director general de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, la señora Laura Thompson, subdirectora general adjunta de la Organización Internacional para las Migraciones, Kailash Satyarthi, Premio Nobel de la Paz, Linda Kromjong, secretaria general de la Organización Internacional de Empleadores, Koulaud Manaí, estudiante y activista de la Unión General Tunecina del Trabajo, Federico Raba, director ejecutivo de Telefónica Argentina, Francisco Martínez, de ADECO. Y vamos a invitar también a Nosipo Banjoa, periodista de CNBC, que será la moderadora de este panel. Le vamos a dar la palabra entonces a la moderadora, Nosipo Banjoa, periodista de la CNBC.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to this high-level panel discussion. As you've heard, my name is Nosipo Banjoa from CNBC Africa, and it's an absolute pleasure and an absolute honor to moderate today's high-level panel discussion. Thank you very much for having me. Now, in the last 2 days, 48 hours, I've been sitting quietly in the audience listening to the conversations that have to be had if we're going to sustainably eliminate child labor and forced labor. And I've heard a couple of things. What I've heard is that we might need to confront and own our collective shame. That in 2017, we still talk about a world where in excess of 153 million children are in child labor. That in 2017, we still talk of a world where in excess of 173 million people are still in forced labor. What I've heard, ladies and gentlemen, is that our eloquent speeches and our analytical insights are not going to change this reality, and that perhaps we've come to a place where our words are just not enough. And what I've also heard is that perhaps it is time for us to move beyond fiddling at the edges, dealing with the symptoms of child labor and forced labor, and that this conversation represents an opportunity for us to connect with the courage that is required for us to take on the deep and systemic challenges that give rise to child labor and forced labor. And so it is my hope and my belief that the conversation that we're going to have now, this high-level panel discussion, is a conversation where we're going to exercise our responsibility to ask the difficult questions. I'm hoping that in this conversation, we're going to exercise our duty to ask the provocative questions. And I certainly hope that in this conversation, we're going to exercise the fact that we have the right to claim the license to ask the questions that not only break us away from the past, but also give us the capacity to exploit the opportunities that come with the future world of work. My panelists have been introduced already, but there's still one more thing that I need to urge from you. This is your conversation. This is an inclusive conversation. I have briefed my panelists and I have said to them, this is not another opportunity for them to make speeches. And so I am urging you to use the Congress app that you have been using for the last 2 days to claim your share of voice. Send us through your questions, send through your comments, and I will uphold my side of the bargain, and I will ensure that each of those questions that we can filter into the conversation are the key drivers of the conversation that we have here today. So, ladies and gentlemen, unlike what you might have been experiencing in the last 2 days, please don't wait for the first hour to pass before you send us your questions. I'd like to use your questions right from the get-go to drive this conversation. So I'm urging you, I'm challenging you to be heard in the conversation that we're about to have. My panelists have already been introduced, so I'm not going to duplicate that function. But instead, I'm going to get straight into the conversation. And I suspect that it might be a good place for us to start at describing the future world of work that we want and how that world of work should be structured. And DG, I'm going to start off with you because one of the things I've heard you say on so many platforms is that the future is not happening to us and that we have the agency and the power to create that future. What does the future world of work look like and how should it be structured?
Well, as your question implies, Nosy, and it's good to see you again, your question implies that there is not a world of work, a future world of work, waiting there in the future to greet us. There is a future of work that all of us have to join together to make, to design. There's no predestination here. And I hope one thing we can all agree upon, particularly sitting where we are at this conference, is that the future of work is going to be, not that it can be, but it's going to be a future without child workers and without forced labour. I don't know what all of you thought about the video that we just watched. I thought the saddest moment of a very powerful set of images was when that young boy was asked what his dream was. And he could have no other answer to say than his dream was to carry on working. I mean, what sort of a failure does that reflect, that that child had no vision of any better alternative? We have to have not just the courage, the moral courage, although that is essential, but the collective political determination to make sure that those alternatives are available. And if anybody here or anywhere else says, well, we don't really know what we have to do to create that future without child labour, without forced labour, I have to say you haven't been listening. You haven't been listening, because we do know. We know from 20, 30 years of experience. We know from everything that's been said in this conference. We know from listening to people like Brother Kailash. We know what has to be done. So there's no excuse. There's no excuse here. So my response to you again is it's a future that we choose to make. We should know what our choices should consist of. And just a last point, because you don't want speeches, I know, is a future with no child labour, a future with no forced labour, has also to be a future where we are striving to create decent work for everybody. Because at the same time as we strive to eliminate what everybody agrees is intolerable, we have also to lift the quality of work for people around the world over and above those essential minima. That's what I think.
So quite a bit that you've put on the table, DG, and one thing that is resonating strongly is that we know what those choices are. The question is, do we have the courage to make them? And Christy, I'm going to give you an opportunity. 2 minutes. What does this world need to look like? We talk about the future world of work. What should that world look like, and how should it be structured?
We also see that this is a tremendous window of opportunity for us to shape the future of work so that it's decent, empowering for all workers, and the exploitation of children and forced labor. I think I'd like to stress 3 points: dignity, opportunity, and responsibility. First, dignity. Child labor is a product of adult poverty, and that's one of the things we've got to eradicate. And starting with living wages for everyone, social protection, but also let's not forget that freedom of association and collective bargaining are enabling rights, which ensure that adults earn decent wages and children are in school and not the fields. Second, on opportunity, we want to all share in the growth of the wealth, opportunity to thrive, where the technology is going to make so many things possible that we can't even imagine today, but opportunity to wipe away, again, inequality and poverty. Shared responsibility. When we come to responsibility, it's the responsibility of our governments, it's also the responsibility of business, it's the responsibility of companies that profit in our global economy to make sure that the people contribute to the value of what they create, that are treated fairly, that there are no children in the supply chain, and so we want to take a look later in this panel today, I'm sure, at due diligence in the supply chains, because we all have to take responsibility to get rid of this problem. We know that where there's a political will, there is a way to do this. This is not impossible. There should not be children in our digital future. There should not be children now working, but certainly when we look forward, it's a fixable problem. Lastly, on responsibility, I want to say that there should be technological responsibility, so that technological innovations have to put the interests of people into the frame. It's not just about coming up with the snazziest new product. We've got to integrate the interests of the whole society.
So quite clearly, dignity, opportunity, responsibility, putting some provocative questions around reaping the efficiencies and the gains of technology, whilst at the same time making sure that technology doesn't have the effect of leaving people behind. Linda, I'm going to come to you, because one of the things that Christy did mention is that it's about shared responsibility, and the voice and the action of the workers cannot be left out of that equation. I'd like to give you 2 minutes to outline for us what the future world of work should look like and how it should be structured.
Thank you. Shared responsibility is indeed true, and I think we've got a great framework in place that addresses that, and that's the UN guiding principle on business human rights. We have a clear, distinct role for government's role to protect the business responsibility to respect and also access to remedy as key concept, which also apply for child and forced labor. But let me first start with, the question you asked about how does the future of work look like? And for me, the future of work really looks like an opportunity. It also really looks like it will be more diverse than we currently see. So we need to embrace the concept of diverse forms of work that can be in any form of relationships and different from what we currently see. And what we need to work upon is on regulations, on a regulatory framework that is fit for purpose, and that also caters for already, I would say, that what we can't even imagine at this point in time. It's flexible enough and agile enough to really embrace that and bring us forward without having continuous need to have discussions about falling back to discussions on legislation again, because it's flexible. The second thing about child labor, and Chrissy already said it, it's about poverty of families. So the key word here for me is education. And it's not only education of children, it's also education of parents. Because we will need to educate them, to enable them to have a better understanding about what they can do. We need to educate them in order to improve their lives for themselves as well as for the children, to improve their overall family income, and by doing so being able for children to do something else than work, which is very often a necessity. And we will need to have this cultural shift around it, where we do show families that child labor is not normal. We should be able to give kids a dream, and that dream indeed should be completely different than just saying I would like to be in work. They should really say, I want to become a soccer player, I want to improve the world, I want to go to university, I want to become a doctor. That is what we would children like to say.
And of course, education is going to become a big theme that we're going to be moving to in a moment. But just before I move forward, just a very quick one, Linda. You introduced an interesting phrase here, this concept of diversity. And I want to link it back to another D, a D that the DG put on the table, and he said decent work. Do we always always make the connection that diverse does not necessarily mean indecent work?
Well, for me, coming from business, yes, we make that connection. For us, diverse forms of work should be regulated, they should be decent, but it doesn't mean that because they are diverse, because they might not be standard as we currently view them, therefore they are necessarily bad. I think they offer a lot of opportunities of people to balance their work life, to have different forms of relationship and different focuses depending on what their current phase in life is, to make easier career shifts. And of course that poses a lot of questions around social dialogue, around social protection, around social security, that we all need to find solutions for. But let's look into the options and let's look into the solutions and not only discuss the issues that we have at hand, because I do firmly believe they offer opportunities.
So, Khulu, do we come to the voice of the young person who's sitting on the panel? You come from the country where the Arab Spring really was born, but you sit not only as a youth activist, but you're also a medical student, in particular an intern specializing in kidney disease. Now, the question that I'd like to ask you is exactly what we've heard from our panelists. As a young person, when we begin to engage with this idea of the future world of work, what do young people want the future world of work to look like? What do young people want to see in terms of how this world can be structured?
Ma vision du futur du travail, ça serait un travail au service de l'humain, un travail qui me permettrait une certaine stabilité dans ma vie en tant qu'être humain, un travail où, parce que je pense que la tâche qu'on a, la masse de travail qu'il y a, c'est pas que les emplois sont en train de diminuer, c'est vrai que c'est le nombre d'emplois qui est en train de diminuer, mais la tâche de travail qu'il y a, pas autant, parce que si la tâche de travail diminuait, on ne trouverait plus d'enfants au travail, on ne trouverait plus des gens qui font des heures de travail en plus. Donc je pense que c'est plutôt un problème de répartition d'heures de travail sur les gens actifs. On devrait répartir, on devrait faciliter l'accès aux jeunes à certains au travail en créant une circulation du flux migratoire. Je ne pense pas que le problème soit vraiment le nombre de postes qu'il existe, c'est surtout la répartition des tâches. Et finalement, en tant que jeune, je souhaite qu'un jour mon travail soit, en plus du porteur de ma dignité, que je sois rémunérée, que la rémunération de mon travail soit en fonction du service que je donne à la société et pas du profit que je donne à l'entreprise dans laquelle j'évolue.
Work that is designed on more imagination. That is a beautiful challenge and one that I hope we get the opportunity to revisit. Now, Kailash, I had the opportunity of listening to you speaking yesterday, and no doubt you're very passionate about this work and you've been leading in this work. But if you had to condense your life's work into a 2-minute clarion call, what should the future world of work look like and how should it be structured?
This one, okay. So it's technology, and the future of work would also depend on technology. You can see it here. I'm trying to figure out how to switch on. So we cannot see the future of work in isolation. It's the future of technology, future of society, future of economy, future of ecology of the world. And that's why I fully agree with TG that we are going to see a world without exploitation of people, without child labor, without forced labor. And in the last 40 years of my life, when child labor was a non-issue, it was a serious problem though, but it was not in discussion. Nobody was talking about it or not doing anything substantial. I could say with confidence that this is going to happen. We are going to make the world without child labor and forced labor. I always say that we will make a world where every child would be free to be a child. Every child would be free to go to school, free to laugh, free to cry, free to learn, free to say daylight. So that freedom. Civilization and slavery cannot go hand in hand. The growth of civilization is also the quest for freedom. So those who believe that civilization can afford slavery, that is not going to happen. But in this process, at the age of 60 plus, I can tell that I have the biggest trust in young people. It is only the youth who is going to drive and who is going to rewrite the future of the world. The world which we are giving to our children and young people perhaps is not so safe. And that's why I fully depend on the power of young people. Many people think that the youth are getting more impatient, more intolerant, more violent. It could be partially true, but they are not responsible for that. It is we who are responsible for not being able to give them a better purpose of life, to channelize their energy and idealism for the betterment of the world. And in this context, let me tell you, I have confidence in myself and confidence in young people, so I have launched Human History's most ambitious and biggest ever campaign, youth campaign, what we call 100 million for 100 million. We are going to address the entire generation through it. 100 million young people are sufferers and victims of violence, slavery, trafficking, all kinds of things, crimes. But on the other hand, out of 3 billion young people in the world whose age is below 25, hundreds of millions of young people are ready to do something now. They wanted to deliver now. So the 100 million for 100 billion campaign is to connect these two diversely going constituencies. Let 100 million young people in schools, colleges, universities, professions should be the spokesperson, champions and change makers for those 100 million left out young sisters and brothers of them. And therefore, I'm confident that the world would be free of exploitation and injustice.
So full confidence and full trust in young people and the fact that civilization and slavery cannot go hand in hand. I'm reminded of one of the discussions I was sitting in earlier today. I think it was Max Trejo, one of the young people, who put up his hand and said, young people are ready to lead now. The future isn't something we're walking towards. The future is right now. So it sounds like your words are landing on fertile soil in terms of the young people that are already here. So, Laura, there is one thing, though, that I want you to, as you respond, to also think about. There's always the fear that some children and some young people will get left behind as we frog march towards this fourth industrial revolution, or as we frog march towards this future world of work. And your work, especially looking at migration, has relevance in this regard. So what should the world look like, the future world of work look like? How should it be structured so that young people and children that are forced to move are not left behind?
Thank you very much. And I was going to start by saying that basically the future is today. We don't have time. I don't think that we can speak about these like what are we going to do in the next 20, 30, 40 years? What do we need to do now? And we just don't have time to think about the theoretical future that might come and that will probably be totally different of what we have today. So let's try to bring back the discussion about these to what are we doing today and what are the problems that we're having today to make this a reality. And I will start by saying, supporting fully what Guy Ryder said about a world without child labor and without forced labor is the basics. And we have to start from there. So now, what I think, and you mentioned the issue of migration, and obviously from my organization, this is one of the most important things. What we are looking for is a world where people can move around and where skills drive markets and not administrative measures and borders that are created to protect very often places or areas where there are important labor market gaps and where needs are not matched, are not fulfilled or filled because of administrative measures at the global level. We have done a lot of effort, I think, throughout the years in the past to come with to a globalized world that represents and gives a freedom of movement of capital, of services, of goods, but we have remained without the capital, the most important capital, that is human beings. So circulation of human beings continue to be a problem, and with demographics, the realities of the world, the labor gaps that exist, if we don't really create a world where people can move around, where people can get the best of their skills used by the private sector, by the public sector, by everybody, we are going to continue having a restrictive world that doesn't fit with the realities of today, with the technology that we have today, with the freedom of movement that we have in a lot of places for other purposes, and where the skills are never matched. So I think we have to move towards that direction. And obviously, to make those markets inclusive, respectful, and certainly to facilitate the entry of the people, including those that are not from the same nationality, into formal global labor markets, so that they do not move in vulnerable conditions, they are not exploited, and they get decent conditions for work.
Thank you very much for that, Laura. But again, driving us to really think about the challenges that we have today and not getting stuck in a theoretical conversation. And I think that's going to be very important as we begin to look at global trends and what this means for the free movement of people. But before I go there, let me come to Francisco and give you, sir, the opportunity to put on the table for us, in less than 2 minutes, your views on what the future world of work should look like and how should it be structured.
Sí. Buenas tardes. Como representante de uno de los mayores empleadores del mundo, con más de 1 millón de personas trabajando todos los días, nosotros desde nuestra compañía de ADECO Group somos muy beligerantes contra el trabajo infantil. Contratamos muchísimos jóvenes todos los días y desde luego no estamos para nada de acuerdo pues con muchas cosas que se están haciendo en el mundo del trabajo, y como líder mundial de servicios de recursos humanos tenemos que ejemplarizar prácticas y tenemos que tomar por delante iniciativas que ejemplaricen al resto de empresas, a los empleadores, en que hay que tener un mundo mejor, hay un mundo mejor de trabajo y desde luego, para nosotros el futuro del trabajo, coincido con lo que decía Laura, el futuro del trabajo es hoy. Yo soy empleador, contrato personas todos los días, tengo muchísimos clientes, todos los días me llegan necesidades, me solicitan personas que muchas veces no encuentro, ¿no? Entonces, es una realidad. El futuro del trabajo ya ha llegado y yo, digamos, coincido con el resto de compañeros de mesa. Aquí hay tres partes que yo haría corresponsables. Por un lado, lo primero de todo, yo soy empresa, somos las empresas, debemos generar empleo. Empleo para una persona es tener vida, es tener futuro, es tener dignidad y tenemos que seguir trabajando, ¿vale?, para proporcionar más empleo. Por otro lado, a los gobiernos y agentes sociales. Nos deben permitir, nos deben dar el marco, el contexto legislativo adecuado para los nuevos tiempos. Estoy de acuerdo que constantemente no tenemos que estar reformulando leyes, vamos a hacer una ley definitiva que nos ayude a que todos seamos más competitivos, tanto personas como empresas. Y por otro lado, a las instituciones educativas, yo la pondría como la tercera parte, porque realmente deberíamos juntarnos, las instituciones educativas, los gobiernos y las empresas, para alinear la formación académica y técnica que necesitan los chicos para las nuevas necesidades del mercado. O sea que, Nusi, yo lo estructuraría con una corresponsabilidad de empresas, instituciones educativas, gobiernos y agentes sociales. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Now, there are a number of questions that have already started to come through. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation. And I'm getting these on these sheets of paper. So if you see someone running up onto stage, it means that they have in excess of 10 new questions that we need to look at. I'm going to actually bring the first question to you, Francisco, because I think it speaks very much to what you have shared and what we've heard from the other panelists as well. And the question is this. It says, what can be done to ensure that government implement policies to protect children when the transnational corporations themselves are the ones that have cheap labor through children, and these same companies are the ones that bring large sums of money to governments in turn to encourage their choices? It's a difficult question, but it's one that I'm going to put firmly at your feet.
Básicamente es muy fácil, o sea, yo soy muy pragmático, soy empresario, soy muy pragmático, yo desde luego sancionaría fuertemente a las organizaciones que utilizan prácticas de este tipo. No es de recibo en el mundo actual, en el mundo de hoy, pues que haya todavía compañías multinacionales pues que encubiertamente en países menos desarrollados pues utilicen trabajo infantil. Yo lo resumiría a eso, Nusi. Sanciones fuertes.
Strong sanctions. Linda, let me just flesh out this question a little bit more. Thank you very much for that, Martinez. But when we talk about supply chains, it's very clear that if we are going to sustainably eliminate child labor, supply chains need to stop seeing children as a resource or as an input in that process. What needs to be done decisively right now if we're actually going to realize this as a reality and move towards the reality that Francisco outlines?
Let me start with saying, and it might be a bit provocative, but I don't think the supply chains are the reason we have child labor. We have child labor because in countries there is a need for families to earn income. They can't earn enough income, and that's why children have to work. So that's the problem we need to address. We have all the regulations in place to make that work. We have the ILO labor standards, we've got the guiding principles. So it's, for me, first and foremost a call. It's first and foremost a call towards governments to make sure that they implement the legislation and enforce it. Make sure there is labor inspections, make sure that there is a transition from informal to formal economy, make sure that communities are being helped to broaden the scope and make sure they can earn a better living. If within a company child labor is being detected, and I fully agree with what was said by Francisco, it needs to be remedied. This is something that is unacceptable for companies to deal with, but it needs to be done at a local level and it needs to be done in collaboration. I'm just going to give an example where you might all be familiar with about modern slavery within Thai fishing industry. That is not a one company issue. That is a societal issue that needs to address together with all actors. And I think that's also what Christy said at the beginning. It's a shared responsibility. And I think that's where I'm going to pause here now. Thank you.
Thank you for putting the pause, because I think I want us to move on from it. But before we do, Christy, I would like your voice in this, because it touches on the next question, one of the questions that we've received here. And the question is, trade union density is declining the world over. Is a future without child labor and forced labor possible without trade unions, or with trade unions whose power has greatly diminished? Whose power has greatly diminished.
I don't see a future without trade unions. So just start from that point. I think that trade unions, are essential towards addressing child labor, both for the reasons that I started off with by saying we need to address poverty, but also trade unions can play a big role in fighting child labor. I want to come back to the point about the supply chain and what, where does the supply chain fit in this? The supply chain may not be the cause of child labor, but it is a place where you find child labor. There, you find children working somewhere in the supply chain, and I think it's a source of it's a way that we can address child labor is through having consequences. And that I agree with Francisco. It's about having consequences when there are children in the supply chain. It's about, it may be consequences through the government enforcing their law, but there also should be consequences for business. And not necessarily the frontline employer. It might be 5 steps later in the supply chain, but we have to move beyond voluntary commitments to get rid of children in the supply chain because that just isn't working. Now, trade unions, yes, our density is declining. That's a well-known fact, but that doesn't mean that that's the future that we see.
So I'm going to move back into the themes that we need to work through. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for all your questions. And I would encourage you to keep them coming. DG, Laura, let me give you an opportunity before I come to DG. A quick one from you, Laura.
Yeah, just one very short point is, I think in all this, I think it is, we have to address causes and we have to address consequences. But what I don't think what needs to be highlighted is the role that each one of us, we have. Because at the end of the day, we are the consumers that are going to buy those products. And if we don't address and we don't raise awareness of all of us, that at the end of the day, we are collaborating with eventually companies or supply chains or whatever that is that have child labor within or forced labor within their supply chains, then we are not aware of the responsibility that we have. And I think it is extremely important to bring to all of us and that we all bring to other people our own responsibility into this.
So causes and consequences, and coming back to shared responsibility. DG, I want to take this a step further and maybe just go into the agricultural economies and agricultural communities in particular, where we've seen a regression in terms of the move towards eliminating or reducing child labor in those specific areas. Firstly, I think it's important for us to understand why we're seeing that regression, and then in your view, what needs to be done?
Yeah, if I can try to sort of join up your question with the discussion that we're hearing about supply chains, because I think the two issues are linked. Can I start my comments by recalling what everybody seems to agree upon, which is shared responsibility, that we all have a responsibility and a part to play in designing and implementing solutions to child labour. So I get a bit nervous, and it tends to happen when we talk about supply chains, because it tends to be quite a controversial discussion. I get quite nervous about a discussion which becomes a bit of a finger-pointing exercise, with some people saying it's the multinationals, theirs is the responsibility, and others saying, well, this is the government's, it's their fault, they've got to do it. The fact of the matter is we both have something to do with this situation. Now, to be very honest, and you asked me about the rural economy, let's put this discussion to some sort of perspective. We know that child labour is strongly concentrated in the rural economy. We know that's the case, 70% plus. We know that child labour is strongly concentrated in conditions of informality, and often with kids, they're not working directly for a big employer, they're often working in a family group. I mean, this is the reality that we're trying to get to. So, you know, the caricature of a deliberate act of exploitation by somebody sitting at the other end of a global supply chain strikes me as somewhat improbable. What is much more realistic as a problem is in very extended and complex supply chains, as has been said, with 4 or 5 or 6 tiers, it can be difficult for a multinational actor to know precisely what's going on right at the end of a supply chain. So this is not a deliberate act, I would say, of abuse. It's a much more complex issue, and of course this is sort of caught up in the notion of due diligence, which we expect enterprises to abide by. What can we reasonably expect in a world of complexity an enterprise to take responsibility for, and what is the job of governments? Now, you've asked me about the rural economy. I don't think it's difficult for anybody here to understand or to imagine why it's so difficult to reach these children. These are situations where, firstly, levels of not just informality, but poverty and hardship, absence of social protection are very prevalent. I mean, this is intuitive, and it's also backed by empirical evidence. It's difficult to reach these situations. The ILO, I think, after a period of some culpable neglect, is rediscovering our responsibilities towards the rural economy and rural development. And I think there's a whole challenge which goes to the issue of child labour, but much beyond it as well, to make sure, and this has to do with migration too, Laura, that people don't have to move out of rural areas and rural employment to get a decent job, but that the rural areas and rural jobs can themselves be decent jobs. So I think child labour fits into that broader societal and global challenge.
It's a broader societal and global challenge, Kailash, but that at its root, there's an ongoing conversation that was very strong that I've been hearing in the last 2 days about, well, shouldn't our education be more accessible? Should it be universal? Should it be an increase in quality? I'd be keen for you to bring in the education element into this conversation. But most importantly, as we talk about a new emerging global economy or future world of work, what do our education systems need to look like now if our children and our young people are going to have meaningful lives in the future?
Well, before responding to your question, let me jump back to the whole debate of supply chain. I cannot
I've
keep
been
quiet.
trying to move us from supply chains without much success, but go ahead.
I agree with Linda that supply chain is not the only system which has to be blamed. But definitely there are push factor, pull factor both. So the push factor is poverty, illiteracy, ignorance of parents, socio-cultural issues and so on. But the pull factor is that the children are the cheapest source of labor. Different tiers of supply chain benefit out of it. And eventually the big brand, I repeat, big brands, big international companies benefit most out of the exploitation of children in the supply chain, through the supply chain. So we have to remember it. Of course, the legal measures are needed, social measures are needed, economic measures are needed, but we cannot get away from that responsibility of the brands. I will give you a concrete example in 10, 20 seconds, if you allow.
Yes.
I have been freeing children from slavery in rug industry in India back in 80s. 2 of my friends were assassinated. I had injuries on all my body while freeing children from slavery and child labor. I saw that many children are entering into child labor, and they were working for big importers, big brands, big companies in England, in USA, in Germany, etc., etc. So we realized that we cannot find the solution. We have to launch the consumers campaign. The first ever consumers campaign related to child labor was launched in Germany, as many of you were the part of it and aware of, in early 90. Almost 30 years ago. And that has picked up momentum, and the consumers started feeling that we have to act, in America and other places also. That has resulted in tremendous pressure on the industry as a whole, Pakistan, India, and Nepal. We have to find a solution, because I was not against the industry, and I was not saying that boycott all kind of carpets. I was saying that let us promote the carpets which are made without child labor. So eventually we have been able to evolve a social monitoring and voluntary mechanism, earlier named as Rugmark and now named as Goodweave. I tell you that according to DOL study, in mid-90s, the number of child laborers in South Asian carpet industry was 1 million. And that has gone down to hardly 200,000 or even less in the entire South Asia in last 15 to 20 years. And that was the result of addressing the problem from both ends, from the consumer's end, from the industry end, from the societal end. This is a concrete example that 800,000 at least children have been saved, and in place of them, at least 800,000 adults, and most of the adults were the very parents of these children, were able to find the jobs. That has become the biggest ever job creation project in South Asia. So this is one. Now coming to the education thing, because that is very important. Yes. I wanted to bring it into the, because if we don't know the success stories, if we don't learn from the experiences in both ways, failure and success, then we are not going to go back with the hope that it is possible, we will make it happen. So we have to assume that responsibility. As far as education is concerned, it's very ironical. I refuse to accept the world is so poor that cannot spare $22 billion to ensure primary education for all children, or $40 billion to ensure upper secondary education, which is now the global commitment under SDGs. We can do it, but we are not doing. So what we need to ensure accessibility, as you asked, or retention in school, first of all, governments have to earmark more budgetary allocations for education. The donor partners have to adhere to their and respect their promises which they have made. So we have to mobilize that money. The corporate sector, the private sector have to also come forward and show the leadership in education. So finances is one reason. That requires infrastructure. 1.7 million teachers are needed today, at least, maybe 1.8 million. 1 million only in Africa. So scarcity of teachers is one reason where the children are not able to retain in schools. So we need teachers. We need infrastructure, as I said. We need totally free education. That is again the global commitment. I'm reminding it here. It is not just for a kind of a talk shop. I am saying that 135 countries officially waived school fees. What out of them, according to Global Monitoring Report on education, 110 countries still charging the hidden fees in uniform, in transportation, in other kind of things. So when we talk of free education, we have to ensure free education for children. And eventually, the education has to be clubbed with employability, has to be clubbed with entrepreneurship and empowerment of people, empowerment of young children. So that kind of education is needed.
So I'm glad that you've taken us right to the heart of education. A lot of the questions that have come through in the second round are all rooted within the education conversation. So we're going to stay there a little bit longer. Hulot, I'm going to come to you in a second. But before I do that, Francisco, I want to come back to you. As one of the world's leading employers, no doubt you're also investing in digital technology that gives you the advantage that you're looking for in the market. Back to the point that I think was raised by Linda, if not Christy, around how do we ensure that the technology is inclusive. It brings me to the question of how is ADECO balancing investing in technology versus employing young people? What is your approach?
Quisiera también hacer una puntualización respecto al tema antes que hemos hablado de la cadena de suministro, las herramientas de control que cualquier multinacional puede poner sobre...
I'm trying. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay. Quisiera antes de hablar del tema de educación y digitalización, sí que quería pues puntualizar respecto al tema de los controles de las multinacionales sobre su cadena de proveedores. Es posible hacerlo. Simplemente es cuestión de querer hacerlo. O sea, estamos hablando que a lo mejor es un sistema complejo, a lo mejor hasta que se llegue a fabricar el producto final pues pasan 6 o 7 proveedores, pero para eso los empleados, los directivos de las compañías multinacionales firmamos multitud de documentos y multitud de recomendaciones de ethic compliance. O sea, pero debemos llegar hasta el final, hasta el origen de la fabricación de nuestro producto o servicio. Yo creo que es posible hacerlo, simplemente se trata de querer hacerlo. Eso por un lado. Y por otro lado, pues en respecto al tema de la formación, pues yo también ratifico que en educación primaria y secundaria debe ser educación gratuita para todo el mundo. O sea, cualquier Estado debe garantizar para todos sus ciudadanos educación libre, educación gratuita y sobre todo salud. Cualquier gobierno o cualquier Estado que se precie, que se llame gobierno, pues debe garantizar estas dos cosas, educación y salud. Y ya entrando en la formación universitaria técnica, sí que debe haber una buena catarsis, sobre todo porque hoy en día la formación académica y técnica que están ofreciendo las instituciones educativas, pues bueno, pues deben renovarse. Debemos juntarnos empresas, gobiernos y instituciones educativas para trabajar un nuevo modelo de gestión del conocimiento. A veces pues las carreras universitarias o las carreras técnicas que existen en determinadas geografías no tienen nada que ver con las necesidades pues que tenemos las empresas. Por eso yo incito a generar un diálogo, grupos de trabajo, comisiones, ¿vale?, por países, por regiones, por provincias, para que entre las tres partes nos juntemos para crear un modelo eficiente y específico para el empleo. Para nosotros, formación no es el objetivo. La formación es un medio para conseguir un empleo. Reitero lo que decía antes. Todos nuestros esfuerzos deben ir dedicados a que los ciudadanos tengan un empleo digno y de calidad. Y respecto al tema de digitalización y el tema de inversión en tecnología, eso es una realidad. Pero está muy bien invertir en tecnología, desarrollar tecnología, pero tiene que haber alguien, ¿vale?, pues que ayude a desarrollarla o que ayude o que la ejecute. Para eso es muy importante ya no solo la formación académica universitaria, que la renovemos, sino que también invirtamos, ¿vale?, en formación de habilidades digitales.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. And you've come right to the heart of yet another question around digital skills. And Khalut, I want to bring this question to you. As a young person, do you feel that the education system that you are exposed to is giving you the required skills to participate meaningfully in the labor market? And if it is not, what type of skills do you think the education system should be focused on?
En fait, je viens d'un pays où c'est limite caricatural ce qui s'est passé. C'est qu'après après l'indépendance de la Tunisie, effectivement, on a été parmi les pays où on a imposé l'éducation gratuite et obligatoire à tout le monde et on a gagné. Sur cela, on a 94% de taux de scolarisation en Tunisie. Le problème, c'est que là, on arrive au bout du chemin parce que finalement, les jeunes en Tunisie, ils ont cru à l'éducation, ils ont été des bons élèves. À un certain moment, pour la dictature, pour se maintenir et en l'absence d'emploi, elle a misé sur les diplômes et ils ont eu un parcours en moyenne 30 ans pour finir le parcours pour avoir un diplôme. Et c'était la principale cause de la révolution en Tunisie. Parce que finalement, il y a les parents qui ont tout misé, qui ont vendu leurs terres, leurs maisons pour que leurs enfants réussissent à avoir un diplôme. Et actuellement, en Tunisie, ce diplôme sert souvent à rien. Comment ? En se basant sur les chiffres, on est un tiers des Tunisiens sont des jeunes, un quart d'entre eux ne travaillent pas. Plus on a un diplôme, plus le niveau d'éducation est élevé, moins on a de chances de travailler parce qu'on est trop qualifié par rapport au marché de travail dans lequel on évolue. Donc, effectivement, il s'agit de revoir tout le système éducatif. Il s'agit de revoir aussi le marché, mais d'un côté, le système éducatif ne doit pas être trop lent. Il faut arriver juste à trouver la bonne dose. Il faut adapter l'éducation au marché, mais en même temps, je me dis, ces compétences qu'on a déjà, est-ce qu'on va les jeter, est-ce qu'on va les oublier, est-ce que c'est notre faute, on n'est pas adapté au marché, mais comment ça se fait-il que mes compétences en tant que médecin sont demandées ailleurs ? Et dans mon propre pays, on n'arrive pas à démarrer ça. C'est surtout un problème économique, je vois. C'est pas que l'éducation, c'est qu'à un certain moment, quand on a tout misé, quand on a été un bon élève en tant que pays, on a milité pour l'indépendance, on a milité pour l'éducation, on a milité pour l'installation de la démocratie. En tant que jeunes, on est très actifs pour essayer d'installer le maximum de liberté. On nous a demandé de nous reformer, d'être souples, de voyager, d'être en exode, de quitter notre pays, de quitter notre rêve. En tant que révolutionnaire, personnellement, je suis tunisienne et je souhaite que mon pays devienne un pays développé. Et j'ai tout fait pour. Mes parents ont tout fait pour. Et ça m'attriste que la majorité des Tunisiens, aujourd'hui, ils se retrouvent à devoir quitter leur pays, que ce soit en tant que diplômés ou non diplômés, pour trouver du travail. Donc je pense que c'est l'éducation, mais ce n'est pas que l'éducation. C'est surtout l'économie, l'emploi qui est mal réparti selon les pays.
So the big challenge that you put on the table is again that alignment of what comes out of the system and the market. Linda, I'm going to come to you. DG, there is a question for you, but Laura, you've been signaling for the last 20 minutes or so. Let me get your comment in.
Thank you. Just to say that I think there are two issues, and everybody's focusing about the quantitative part of it. Access to education, and certainly it's a very important issue, and it is going to become even more important in some continents like Africa, where you are doubling the population in the next 25 years. So it's certainly a huge problem. But access is not enough. We need also a qualitative shift to do in order to prepare people to do the jobs that need to be done and that the jobs that exist today. And I did some studies in INSEAD, and in INSEAD they said there are two problems in the education system. Basically, you are educating, the whole world system is educating people in areas that are no longer needed.
Yeah.
And we are not educating people in the areas that are needed in the future, first of all. And second, we are educating people, we're teaching people on what to think and not how to think. And that, I think, is a qualitative shift on education that we need to do. And as long as we don't do it, we will continue to generate even qualified people that don't find any jobs because the jobs are not available. They don't have the skills that are required in order to do the jobs. So we will continue to have mismatch of labor requirements and people unemployment, even in developed countries.
So Linda and Christy, dying to jump in, and as you do, thank you very much for that, Laura. As you do, the question that has come from the floor is, who is responsible for the curriculum that gets us to the future? Linda.
Yeah, I think, and it's a very important comment made by Laura, it's we need to train our children, but also ourselves, everyone, to learn how to continuously learn, because that's what is expected from all of us, that we need to be agile, to be flexible in order to adapt to the different needs and the changing needs of it. So how to learn and how to continue to learn is I would say, important expectation that we have of many of the university of the educational systems. And that brings me also to the point that it's also important that we not only focus on university. You made that comment here about having great university careers and there is no job. There's many other, I would say, types of education that can offer as good as career opportunities and I would say good fulfillment and a good income generation that are not university based. They are more practical based, where there is a great exchange between universities, between educational systems and business, where it's training on the job, but also where the skills and to work together, the soft skills and the competencies are becoming more and more important. So the vocational training systems are very important. Apprenticeship models are being very important, as I would say, learning models for the future. But the key is really learn how to learn and make sure you have the curiosity to continue to learn and adapt. And if you may allow me one side step back, because I do want to comment on something that was said by Francesco related to supply chain, and we can solve everything and the will is there. And I think, yes, will is extremely important. And I think a lot of goodwill has been shown, and we see an increased request for transparency that's being shown by companies. It's not only the consumer push, but there's also the investors push that is not to be underestimated here. But willingness is one. But I think it's also the realism is important. Supply chains are very complex. We will not be able to solve everything by just one company. We need to do it together. And every company in the supply chain has its own distinct responsibility in addressing the issues. So we need to get to the root causes, which we already addressed upon. But I just want to share with you willingness, extremely important. There is a big will from business to do that, but the realism has to kick in as well in order to make it work.
So when we get to the end of the conversation, Linda, what I am going to ask is for us to think about what are the new questions that we need to solve if we're really going to move forward and see progress. And I'm hoping that there's going to be a new question about supply chains, because clearly it's been a consistent and a strong theme in this conversation. But Christy, you had your hand up, and I keep pushing DG back, and I will come straight to you after Christy. But Christy, I think your hand was a little bit more urgent than DG right now.
You know, I'll be very brief. I want to echo what Linda was saying on education, just coming in on the education point. The one thing we see about education and what we're preparing unions for in the future, it's not about just getting one degree or getting trained to do one occupation. It has to be that we're building in a framework for lifelong learning. Who's going to pay for that? How does it get decided? Whether this is the employer responsibility, should this be something we negotiate with governments? But we have to talk about lifelong learning, because the rapid pace of technological change, you know, the pace will be so rapid that there's not a certain amount of training that you can get at any one point in time that will take you through the next 10 years. So that's one, I think, signal point that we all have to get our heads around it for education. Which has to, therefore, there has to be a foundation of literacy, numeracy, you know, digital analysis. There has to be some foundational skills, but we do have to expect lifelong learning.
So if we tie up all the conversations that have been taking place around this theme of education, but maybe very beautifully and eloquently put by Kholod right at the beginning, saying that maybe education can be about imagination. It can be spaces that unleash imagination. And what I'm also hearing from the panel is that maybe education could be about curiosity. In your view, what is the role of education in the future world of work, and do we need to rethink the way we've been understanding education up until this point?
It's a big question. I've noted down 3 or 4 ideas to try to answer what you have asked. Just to go back to the basics. Universal accessibility to education is given as a societal target for many reasons. It's a matter of basic social justice. Every human being should have access to education. We also know from this conference and everything else that we've talked about that, you know, universal education up to a certain age is a compulsory education, matched with minimum age of entry into employment. You know, it means you don't leave that gap where kids fall into work for lack of an educational opportunity. So that's the first point. The second point is, and here I agree with Lara, it's not just access, it's about quality. You know, there is a difference between educational attendance and educational achievement. There are too many cases where kids actually turn up to school in the morning, they learn nothing. They learn nothing because the schools are not places where people can learn, the teachers are not there, or the teachers are not qualified to do the job that they must. So we need to think not just about educational attendance, but educational achievement. The third question is this rather difficult question, if you ask me, about this much commented upon mismatch between what people learn in education and what labour markets require of people. And this leads people into very, I think, quite entrenched positions. There is a constant call for the adjustment of educational systems to meet the needs of labour markets so that people come out of education and can more easily find jobs. It's a fair point, but life isn't as simple as that. I've yet to have a good explanation from anybody about why families, parents, students continue to make educational choices about the things they want to learn about that do not respond rationally to the signals that you get from a labour market. People
Yeah.
don't do it. Now, if we were all rational economic actors, you would say we are stupid. We're doing things which are stupid. That's not probably the right conclusion. The right conclusion is that this is more complicated than the rational economic actor. People want to learn. They have interests. We've all had kids. You know, are we going to prohibit people from going to study art history or philosophy because there's no demand for those people? There is an autonomous meaning for education in our societies which cannot be reduced entirely to what is demanded on the labour market. That's just a fact. But there's still a problem. So I'm sitting on the fence a wee bit on that one. One of the best ways to overcome this paradox, and it's proven again and again to work, is that where you can combine classic school classroom learning with workplace learning through apprenticeships, dual educational systems. Sounds like a cliche, but some cliches are true. Well, the results are that much better. And we all know that. Some countries do it remarkably well, other countries don't do it very much. And the problem is, and we should be aware of simplicity here, it's not easy to transpose the good practices of one country to another country, because good dual education systems depend on good institutions, good trust between employers, government and workers. It's a difficult thing to build.
Yeah.
And my last point, and it's already been said, so I'll be very quick with it, Nosy, is lifelong learning has to be the order of the day. One encouraging thing about being here in Argentina is that we know that when Argentina takes over the presidency of the G20 very soon, they're going to make lifelong learning one of the very, very top issues the G20 is going to deal with. Because we have to get out of the notion that I grew up with, which is that you learn and you're educated for the first 20 years of your life, and then you work for the next 40 or so. That doesn't work any longer. It's got to be a constant intertwining of work and education, because the rate of change in the world of work means however bright you are when you're 20, the skills that you learn will not be relevant when you're 60. And we're all going to be working when we're 60 or a bit older than that in the future.
Gigi, thank you very much. And I think very well consolidated thoughts there. But Kailash, I think sometimes you run the risk when we talk about education to focus too heavily on higher education, maybe even secondary education. So I'm going to move us just to a level lower. And I want us to look at the 5 to 11-year-olds in particular, where we have actually seen virtually no progress since 2012 when it comes to the elimination of child labor there. How should we be, firstly, before we rethink and fix, what is the cause? Why are we seeing such no progress in that regard? And in your view, how do we decisively ensure that the conversations and the realities that we talk about in this conversation hold true for children between the ages of 5 to 11 as well?
Well, I partially answered it here and partially yesterday in my remarks, that first of all, we are not investing enough on early childhood care and protection. And that should lead to primary education between the age of 5 or 6 and 11, 12. Secondly, we have been not able to provide a child-friendly environment which also requires investment in education. That also requires change in the mindset of people. Accessibility is definitely one thing. That includes geographical accessibility. In many cases, in many countries, the schools are quite far for the younger children to go and attend, and expensive in many cases. Transport is expensive, so practical difficulties are there. In a number of countries, I personally saw that teachers' absenteeism, as I said before, we don't have enough teachers, but the responsibility of teachers to ensure attendance in a school is also a big question mark. And I would again underline, which I said yesterday, that we had made a commitment as international community in Incheon, in South Korea last year, that every country will spend at least 6% of GDP or minimum 15, that may go up to 20% of its annual spending on education for children. Hardly a few countries do it. So our priority is not education for children yet. And again, bigger difficulty is with the children who are belonging to displaced communities, migrant communities, the children who are refugee children. We will talk later, I think, today. But this is the category of children which is much more vulnerable. And finally, I would underline, we are having this theoretical debate and some practical things, but these things have been debated. I was the part of it. Being the founder of Global Campaign for Education, which is the largest civil society initiative and coalition in the world, and also being the founder of Global March Against Child Labor, we have been pushing the agenda of hardest to reach children or hard to reach children in the development agenda, but also in education agenda. And now we partially successful in bringing these four aspects of in education in goal number 4 of SDG. Lifelong learning we are talking about. Of course, ILO played also an important role in it to bring it. But inclusive, quality, and equitable, these are the 3 pillars of primary education and secondary education. Inclusion in education, like special care for children with disabilities or what we call the special abilities, the children belonging to most marginalized sections of society like indigenous people, tribals, hilly people, and the people who are living in abject poverty, their children are missing an education, and that inclusion has to be brought into it. Then we can also address simultaneously the issue of child labor. The quality which we talked about, but that is a big debate which has always been there, that we have to ensure the quality outcome, learning outcomes, and all those things. And UNESCO has done a lot of work on it. So we have reports and reports about quality in education. So I don't want to repeat all those things, what should be the learning outcome theories and so on. Yeah. And equitable education. Unfortunately, many governments in the world do not own the responsibility of delivery of public education. Yeah. And as fundamental right, as constitutional right, as the responsibility, legal binding and so on. They are passing on it to privatization. So the commercialization of education has become a big challenge now, that in public school system we are not able to deliver a quality education and we cannot retain the children in primary classes. Younger children look for quality education, and that is very expensive in private schools, these commercial schools. So it's really quite challenging that how we are going to make the balance between the public-private partnership in education, but on the other hand, how we can avoid the commercialization of education, where a fundamental right is sold in the market, and those who can afford to buy, they can buy as a commodity. Education is our right, it's not a commodity, and that has to be ascertained.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, and absolutely. When fundamental rights become commodities to be sold in the market, we're almost towards the end of our conversation, and I'm prompting you to begin to start thinking about the burning questions that you think we need to be asking in the future if we're going to take our conversations forward. But before we do that, Laura, I want to just bring a question to you from the audience. We've had an amazing inflow of questions that have come through. We haven't been able to take all of them on, but I think this one is quite important because it touches back on inclusivity that we're hearing from Kailash. And the question is, women and girls face even greater challenges in their future of work than men. They tend to be lower skilled and subsequently at a higher risk for automation of their tasks and more prevalent in informal work. What special steps do we need to take to ensure that women and girls are not left behind as economies continue to change?
Thank you very much for that question. It's extremely difficult to answer. Well, obviously, we need inclusive societies in order to give women the possibility to really access what men can access today. I think we need to change our minds and our brains, basically. Even in societies where women have a lot of access, still there are areas where women don't have the same level of access. But it also reflects in the way that we women, we think. I have been trying to promote very much the idea of, we talk about the empowerment of women, and I keep saying, sorry, women, we are powerful. We have been powerful always. Actually, men know better than us that we are the ones that are powerful.
I think we can take a round of applause for that one.
So we don't need to empower women. We are powerful. We just need to let them do it. And I think that's the difficult challenge, because we have learned to be powerful from below, from behind, and we have to come out and dare to do it. At the same time, we have to be more, we have to strengthen our solidarity among women, because we are very often the ones that are more destroying the others or competing with the others in a way that is not the best way. But at the end of the day, I think we have all to create the conditions and to eliminate all the unconscious bias that we have that affect all of us, regardless of whether we are men or women. And we see it very often in the work that we do. We are trying to do that within our organization, because we have serious problems about women parity and all organizations we have. And we realize that part of the problem is the way that we select people. Now, I think there is something else that is important when we talk about women, and I have been saying that in my organization. Migrant women, for example, we always focus on the vulnerabilities of the women. We say, you know, vulnerable populations as children, women, the elderly, and I keep saying, is it possible that the half of the population is vulnerable and that the half of the migrants are vulnerable? No. The reality is that we have to see also these social phenomena as opportunities. And we have to bring those women, for example, migrant women, that are seeing it as a possibility of changing the roles in the society, informing the societies with these new opportunities, giving women access to work, giving women access to education, giving women access to decide what they want in their lives. I think if we start looking at those things as opportunities and not as problems, and then we build on them and we help them to become really drivers of the societal change that is required, maybe we can do a big step on that.
Khaloud, do you feel powerful?
Oui, effectivement, parce qu'au-delà de l'éducation et le côté intellectuel, ce qui s'est passé, c'est que pour les Tunisiennes, c'était une liberté imposée par la loi, une liberté qui était voulue sur le plan politique pour toutes les Tunisiennes, mais il y avait un décalage sur le plan culturel, sur le plan traditionnel. On est arrivé à une époque où la femme tunisienne a beaucoup plus de diplômes que l'homme en Tunisie. Elle est, franchement, sur le plan économique, elle est le pilier de l'économie au sein de la famille, mais elle n'arrive pas à s'imposer, elle n'arrive pas encore à parler. Et ce qui s'est passé, c'est qu'avec la révolution, on a dû refaire notre propre révolution féministe, où c'est la femme qui défend le droit de la femme, c'est pas une politique mondiale ou une politique voulue par un homme politique. Donc effectivement, à chaque femme de faire sa propre révolution avec elle-même.
Isn't that beautiful? When women are setting their agenda, not because it's defined by a policy, but just because it's the way of life. Now, as we begin to wrap up our conversation, the challenge that I'm going to put to each of my panelists is that I think it's very important in all the conversations that we have, that our conversations move us forward, that our conversations give us the capacity to ask new questions that we need to grapple with. So I'm going to ask the panelists to close with questions, questions that you think you want to leave embedded in our hearts and our minds as we leave Buenos Aires. What questions do you want us to think about? What questions do you want us to continue to grapple with? And oftentimes I think when we get to the end of the conversation, we want to put a neat little full stop at the end of it. And I'm saying, maybe not. Let's open up the conversation and let's ask new, fresh questions. And I'm going to be fair, so I'm going to start right at the far end. I'm going to go to Francisco first. And I'm going to ask you, sir, what are the new questions that, it could be a question or could be more than one question, that you think we need to grapple with if we're really going to not only hit, but we're going to surpass Sustainable Development Goal 8.7?
¿Por qué no somos capaces de ejecutar todas las iniciativas que estamos hablando y que vamos a seguir hablando? ¿Por qué no somos capaces? ¿Qué barreras encontramos para poner en marcha todas las iniciativas tan buenas de las que estamos hablando? Esa es mi pregunta.
Thank you very much. Why we're not capable of executing the many initiatives that we have so eloquently laid out. Again, it goes to the heart of the conversation that we've been having here today. Laura, I'll come to you next. And as I lay out the questions, I'm hoping as well that a question around how we improve the effectiveness of the coalitions that hold us together and that go to the heart of why we're all here. We're here because we believe in social dialogue is definitely going to come up. But Laura, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What is the big question that you think we should be asking as we leave this conference?
Well, for me, it's what can I do as a person to eradicate child labor? And I think, again, we all have a role. Everyone that is here has a role. So as a consumer, as a father, as a mother, as a member of the society, what can I do? What is my part into all this? Because it's not only government, organizations, or companies. We all have a role.
Thank you very much, Laura, and you've taken us right to the beginning. When we talk about the future we want, we are the architects of that future, so it comes back to our own agency. And so the question that's been raised, what can I do? I think it's a beautiful question. The marketing people in the team, it's a great campaign. Very happy to talk about it if necessary. DG, I'm going to come to you later. I'm going to give you the final word. I'm going to come to Kailash. The one big question, can be more than one question, that you think we have to plant in the hearts and minds of everyone who's here today if this conversation is going to matter. What would that question be?
I think that when we go back from here, we should have a question in mind that what is the need of holding the 5th conference? Why we have to come again and again and talk more or less the same things? We cannot find the solution in rhetoric way. How long we will keep on talking child labor? How long we will keep on talking slavery? We have the power, we have the capacity. We need not to come back any place again. If we come, we should come for celebration. That question we should take back home.
Fantastic. So the big question there, what is the need for the 5th conference? And the challenge that you put on the table is the next time we meet, can we not meet in celebration? Kulut, let me give you an opportunity. The one big question that you want to leave in this audience of a couple hundred people, what do you want them to grapple with after today?
Ma question va surtout s'adresser aux syndicalistes. C'est pourquoi la masse syndicale est en train de diminuer, pourquoi on est en train de freiner nos demandes syndicales sous prétexte que les choses changent, les demandes sont... C'est vrai que le monde du marché change, c'est vrai que les employés sont tout simplement beaucoup plus vulnérables parce qu'ils sont distribués dans tous les parts du pays. Un travailleur est actuellement isolé, donc le travail du syndicaliste est beaucoup plus difficile. Et comment rendre ce travail possible? Comment pouvons-nous défendre les jeunes travailleurs dans le secteur informel et quand s'arrête notre responsabilité sociale envers les enfants qui sont en train de travailler? Nous, en tant que syndicalistes, sur nos syndicats de base, qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire?
Thank you very much. So how can we protect young workers that continue to be a part of the informal sector? Thank you very much for that, Khulet. And again, getting to the heart of, if we go back, for example, just to Africa, where we find that the majority of the markets are informal markets. So if we choose not to take on that question, we actually are decisively leaving behind millions of people who are part of the informal sector and have not formalized as yet. Linda, your question or questions that you want to plant in the minds and hearts of the couple of hundred people here today.
Well, my question really would be around how can we make sure that we change the language in how we are addressing the issues at hand. We're talking about issues, we're talking about challenges, we're talking about problems, but let's talk more about opportunities, because that's much more positive language. What are the opportunities for business, for society, for the children, for the women, if? So I would like to ask that question, what are the opportunities for all of those groups, if? And there's another question I would like to ask, and that is coming back towards, say, to women empowerment. What can we do to, and you're saying women are already empowered, but I think reality is there is still a big push needed there. How can we make sure that women are being encouraged not only by women, but also by men? Because we need to have here a shared discussion to make it work.
Thank you very much. How do we change our language? How do we move to identifying opportunities? And how do we ensure that both men and women encourage women and it is an inclusive conversation? Three very powerful questions that you've put on the table. Christy, question or questions? What do we get from you?
I'll focus on one big question, which for me, the question is all about political will. And so how do we build the political will that's going to be required to enforce human rights for all workers and poverty, and therefore, by extension, the need for child labor or the practice of child labor? I would never say that we need it. I think this is the question that we have it within our capacity to end child labor right now. It's an urgent problem. It is not a future world of work problem. It is not, we should not come back for a fifth conference. I agree with all of that. We have the capacity. How do we build the political will to make that happen?
How do we build the political will to make all our aspirations happen? Thank you very much. And yes, you may clap. It is a very fun, very strong point that's coming through. Human rights, poverty. Thank you very much for that, Christy. DG, you have the final question, and potentially this is the question that's going to go on the report. That is going to be collated at the end of these conversations. So it has to be a good question, DG. It has to be a very strong question as well. What is the question that we should continue to grapple with after today?
Well, you put me in a difficult position because I wrote down 3 questions and they've all been mentioned by other colleagues, so I'm a bit troubled by this. So you might spot a bit of repetition here, but it's not just plagiarism. The way I look at it is the following. We started this conversation, I think many conversations, by all agreeing, and it's good when we can all agree, that this future of work is not out there, it's not already determined by anybody else, it's not determined by robots. It will be what we decide and what we do. That's a very beautiful principle, and I think it's true. But then the question is, and it's really paraphrasing Laura's question, is where do I fit? Where do I fit as a politician, as an employer, as a trade unionist, as a citizen, as an NGO activist, as a family member? Where do I fit in to this overall effort, this overall need to be active. I guess the question I will ask people is, what right have I got to do nothing? What right have I got to be a spectator? And then how do we overcome, how do we break out of just our simple personal self-interest? How do we overcome what might be seen as a sort of a cold-headed calculation of where my self-interest lies in the future, to actually dedicate my efforts to something which is a broader social goal that we all share? Jump out of your own sort of space and join with others. They're a bit the same questions, but I said it differently.
Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think we could have ended this conversation on a better note. Where do I fit in? What right do I have to be a spectator? And how do I overcome my own self-interest for a greater social goal? It's been an absolute pleasure being your moderator for this conversation, and I'd like to say a big thank you to my panelists who have been fantastic. And ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say a very big thank you to you. Your conversations, your questions have really driven this conversation. Thank you so much for trusting us with the process. Have a good evening.